that out of the total of about 64,300 land claims that have been settled since 1998, only about 8,300, about 12.9% of the successful claimants took possession of the land that they sought, while about 56,000, or about 87%, chose money or financial compensation instead.
When a child's umbilical cord is cut, you take and bury it in the soil. So that child joins the ancestors. So if you are surprised why South Africans seem to have lost their mind, it is because we have violated the first principle.
Guys, so this guy Ernst van Zyl, I think he works for Afriforum, actually is shaking a lot of quarters among black majority in South Africa, arguing that, the ANC is hoarding a lot of land, but the few that it has actually offered, to be redistributed, especially in terms of the whole land claims court, so to speak, that many black South Africans and many of the claimants of this land actually didn't want to take the land, but they rather chose to take money, and that impacts the whole argument on land redistribution in South Africa. Let's quickly listen to how he analyzes the statistics of how it has been difficult to redistribute land in South Africa from his perspective as what would be called a white South African, and I'll be back for that analysis.
Yeah, because we're also joined by Ernst van Zyl, who is Afriforum's head of public relations. And Ernst, obviously where you have the land question, you're going to be met with some pushback. And I'm keen to see if that really is what Afriforum is doing here, what you've done, in fact, at the beginning of this month, announcing that you have made it clear that the organization that is Afriforum has made it clear to the ANC that you will launch substantial legal action to protect private property rights in South Africa in the event that the president signs the expropriation bill or if the ANC tries to amend the constitution. So it seems that you might be going head to head here with the steps that are being taken by the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Ernst.
Well, Naledi, actually something that's very pertinent to this topic is the fact that Afriforum actually supports the restitution process that has been in place for many decades in South Africa. Unfortunately, a land restitution process that has been completely derailed by mismanagement, corruption, land going to those with the bright political connections. We all know the story. I mean, there's so many stories out there of this. Often also a land restitution process where those who gain the land through this process do not get the proper support from the government that was promised. And Dr. Amfele mentioned that when she gave her inputs. And there's another aspect here that's absolutely critical to understand in regards to solving the problem of getting more South Africans involved within the agriculture sector, particularly with agricultural land. And that is the fact that just this month, the Ministry of Land Reform and Rural Development confirmed through a parliamentary question that out of the total of about 64,300 land claims that have been settled since 1998, only about 8,300, about 12.9% of the successful claimants took possession of the land that they sought, while about 56,000, or about 87%, chose money or financial compensation instead. That's a critical fact to take into account here. When it comes to the redistribution of land, that's what needs to be addressed. It's not the problem that there is not land to be redistributed. It is that land is being hoarded by the government on one side. On the other side, people are choosing money and financial compensation rather than the land itself. And I think that's the other damning statistic, is the fact that of all the land that the government has acquired since the start of the land reform process, only about 6% has been transferred to private ownership. So we have a big problem with a government that is hoarding land, and one of the other panelists mentioned this as well, the fact that a lot of the land that's been expropriated or bought by the government has been not redistributed to private hands. And I mean, this is where the real scary or real big statistics come in that paint the full picture. The state owns about 17 million hectares of land, and that is more or less the area of the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga combined. Then if you also take into account that the ownership of about 8.3 million hectares has not yet been officially accounted for, even though experts expect much of it will fall under state ownership, that's another Mpumalanga-sized piece of land that the state is holding on to. So that's the challenge. When any conversation about land redistribution is to be had, the first place that conversation needs to go is that the government needs to put its redistribution where its mouth is, stop talking about land redistribution, and actually start redistributing the land that it's hoarding, the millions upon millions of hectares of land that it owns. And I mean, that's where the critical issue lies, is that we don't have a problem with no land being available for redistribution. We have millions of hectares of land in state control that are there for redistribution. It's just not being redistributed for those two reasons that I mentioned. Firstly, the fact that the government is not redistributing it, and secondly, that almost 90% of claimants are opting for money rather than land.
Ernst, and I hear you, and I want to bring
now let's understand this problem from the perspective of an African, an Afrocentric perspective, from the CEO of Reimagine South Africa, breaking down why the whole issue with land is this complex and why land seems to be, as in, really important to the Black people in South Africa.
The reason is that without the restitution and reform and transformation of land ownership in South Africa, what we committed to in the preamble of our constitution, to heal the wounds of our ugly past, the fundamental sin that has brought South Africa to where it is today, it is the sin of land grabs, land dispossession by the colonial system. And so if you want to translate the dream which fired up the liberation struggle, which was to repossess the land. And why is that important? Human beings are rooted in the soil. If you're a Christian, they say dust to dust returns. If you are an indigenous believer like I am, as well as a Christian, you know that when a child's umbilical cord is cut, you take and bury it in the soil. So that child joins the ancestors. So if you are surprised why South Africans seem to have lost their minds, corruption, unaccountability, violence, distraction, it is because we have violated the first principle of being human, which is to be connected to the land. And so, for me, the primary problem of our country after 30 years of democracy is that we are unable to create the free, sustainable, prosperous, non-racial democracy that we dreamt of, because we have failed to deal with the original sin, which is land dispossession. And who is responsible? It's not the original dispossessors. The original dispossessors were given permission by a government that claimed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It is not. It is a government of elites, for elites, by elites. That's why 31 members of cabinet, either this or previous order, own farms. But the people whose land was taken away would be given pieces of paper with absolutely no proper follow-up. And I speak as one of the beneficiaries of land restituted to us in Christwood, Mara, in the Makado region, in 1996. Till today, we still do not have the capital resources, the funding that was supposed to go with the restitution of the land so that we could make it truly functional,
right,
sustainable. As Naledi is saying, that the issue of people opting for cash contradicts what I said about our being connected to the land in a very spiritual way. The issue is the Mandelas of this day were committed to social justice. We're committed to rebuilding South Africa as a country reflecting the African wisdom of Ubuntu. They tried, but they failed because their comrades who came from exile and from other parts did not understand that governance is not about wishes and ideas and ideology. Governance is a technical matter. You need to understand what it means to govern. It's like managing a country in the way you manage a company. But you bring to that your ideals, your fundamental principles, etc. And so it is not correct to say the Mampelas of this day were silent when the EFF was talking about the change in the constitution. The constitutional change will not make a difference. We have a constitutional dispensation that allows for an effective health system, education system, labor system. We don't have those effective systems.
Okay.
Why? Because we don't have the competence. And so I really would like us to face the facts that what we are confronting today, whether it's in land reform or in hospitals where dirty linen in Baragwanath hospital is now up to the reception, it's not about anybody stopping proper governance or proper management. It's about having the right people in the right positions.
And right skills.
And committed to serving people. Ubuntu bulahlekile bantu benkosi. So I'm just saying, those who are choosing cash are people who know that they've been betrayed. They cannot trust anymore. My community got land in 1996. They still cannot go and occupy that land because the money to simply fence off the place, to get the place proclaimed as a settlement place, is not there. There is a man in Limpopo province, in the Department of Agriculture and Land Reform, who is saying that he is the chief of transport and nothing happens without him. We have presented business plans and they get chucked out as too expensive. When you finally have one that they agree is appropriate, the money still doesn't flow.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. So I think it's really tricky. This whole issue with land. I remember the last video I made with Thabo Mbeki actually arguing that, if you look at the ANC Freedom Charter, he actually argues that, land in South Africa belongs to all who work it, all right? And when you listen then to Julius Malema, he speaks about land expropriation without compensation. And this land should actually be expropriated to the black people, who have been historically disenfranchised in the history of South Africa going forward. But then if we follow the statistics, maybe I'll make another video, trying to analyze the whole statistics of the black majority or the lands that actually been attempted to be redistributed by the ANC but actually had been refused, because this argument here that most of the land that was actually supposed to have been redistributed to the claimants of the land ended up choosing money instead of the land. And it speaks to the difficulty of farming, a difficulty of productivity. You see, when you have land is really something that actually really needs resources to also cultivate. Okay, I'm actually all for the redistribution of land back to the blacks who have actually been historically disenfranchised. But that must follow investment, all right? So when you empower a farmer who is black, you also have to empower them with investment, so to speak, to be able to work the land and all that. So this is the problem, you know, and now that we see that the world is shifting to a much more neoliberal system of development with the neoliberalism and trade and, having to be able to trade your skills and all that, it's really easy to go for money because it's difficult to really understand how the whole finances, especially with what that advocate usually speaks about. I don't know what his name, I really have to try to look for his name, but he speaks about how what is affecting the black majority today in South Africa, which is the majority, is actually a structural violence. And this structural violence is actually from an economic structure that was inherited, but it wasn't, redistributed during the period of independence under Mandela. And so at the end of the day, it's really a question of what to do with land. And this is a really difficult problem. And I think probably this might be one of the reasons why the ANC has been hesitant with all of the land claims in the land claims court. I remember I made a video once with Chris Pappas actually arguing that, the whole thing with the land claims court, there are lots of claims that are still hanging in the land claims court, and Van Ernst still here actually arguing that the ANC is hoarding a lot of land. The ANC doesn't want to release all the land that it has purchased. And could it be as a result of the fact that the ANC knows that a lot of the people who would receive this land would actually prefer to be given money rather than land to work the land and all of that? It's a really difficult question, a really difficult place for the black community, for the black majority in South Africa, and also the white farmers who are actually also doing very well, trying to provide a food supply for the nation, because it's a really complex issue, this whole issue with land. But I really like us to engage in a robust discussion. Let's have a robust discussion in the comments. Share your thoughts. What do you think about this guy's speech here in this video? Really striking with the fact that, rather than taking land that was actually supposed to have been redistributed, a lot of the black people who had claims on this land chose money, all right? And so at the end of the day, when they're giving money, land actually is of a higher value than money, because money is only fiat currency. If you're giving 500,000 rand or so, if you're not wise enough to put that into some kind of investment going forward, then that whole money then escapes or disappears, and we see the cycle of poverty returning again while the land remains with the government. So it's a really complex issue, this whole thing with land redistribution. What do you guys think about this thoughts here? Share your thoughts in the comments.